with allies, enemies, and a reputation for building warships that scared even their friends. All because aliens had scanned a human warship, and what they saw had left them terrified. And maybe, just maybe, that wasn't such a bad thing after all. The end. You mean to tell me that you humans don't have a patron deity of war? Ambassador Vkr'lak's translucent appendages quivered in what I recognized as disbelief. Every sentient species has one. It's practically a universal constant. I swirled the alien liquor in my glass, watching how it seemed to glow faintly purple against the backdrop of the diplomatic reception. The Galactic Conclave always threw the most unnecessarily extravagant parties. We did, actually, I replied, taking a sip and immediately regretting it as the liquid burned a path down my throat like liquid nitrogen mixed with habanero extract. We killed him. The ambassador's 6 eyes blinked in rapid succession, their nictitating membranes giving the impression of a rippling wave. You killed your god of war? Forgive me, Captain Vega, but that seems impossible. Yeah, we get that a lot. I set my glass down on a passing server drone. But you have to understand something about humans and our mythology. We don't just worship our gods, we judge them. Around us, the grand reception hall of the Conclave Station hummed with the sounds of 24 alien species attempting diplomacy, which mostly meant getting tipsy on various biochemically compatible intoxicants and gossiping about who was colonizing whose moons behind their backs. Ambassador Vkr'lak gestured to a quieter alcove, away from the main crowd. As we moved, I noticed several other alien diplomats suddenly finding reasons to drift in our direction. Word traveled fast in interstellar diplomatic circles, especially when it involved the bizarre monkeys from Earth. Please, Vkr'lak said once we'd settled into the relative privacy of the alcove. I find human mythology fascinating. In our culture, the god of war, Vkr'lak, is revered and feared in equal measure. The idea of disposing of such a deity is... Their translators seemed to struggle for a moment. Sacrilegious doesn't quite capture it. I leaned back against the strange, almost but not quite marble of the alcove wall. By now, 3 other ambassadors had joined us. The insectoid Vkr'lak, the gaseous cloud entity that represented the Mool Collective, and a Talaxian whose name I couldn't pronounce without coughing up a lung. It's not like we set out to kill a god, I explained, watching their various alien expressions of shock, curiosity, and what I assumed was the non-human equivalent of morbid fascination. It was more like a performance review that went really, really badly. The story, as humans tell it, and yes, I'm taking some creative liberties here for you non-humans, begins thousands of years ago during what we call the Bronze Age. Humans had just figured out how to make pointy metal things to stab each other with, which was apparently all we needed to start organizing ourselves into armies. Our god of war at the time was named Ares by the Greeks, Mars by the Romans, and about 50 other names by various cultures. For simplicity's sake, let's just call him Ares. He was your typical war deity, big, muscular, armed to the teeth, fond of screaming battle cries and reveling in the clash of armies. But here's where humans differ from most of you lot. We expected results from our gods. Hold on, interrupted the Vkr'lak ambassador, mandibles clicking in what I recognized as their version of incredulity. You expected results? From a cosmic entity? Absolutely, I nodded. Humans don't do blind faith very well. We're more of a, what have you done for me lately? Kind of species when it comes to deities. The gaseous ambassador rippled in what my neural translator suggested was laughter. Please continue, urged Vkr'lak, who seemed caught between theological horror and intense anthropological curiosity. Right, so Ares, big war god, lots of muscles, terrible temper. The problem was, he wasn't very good at his job. See, a proper god of war should understand strategy, tactics, the art of battle, the whole package. Ares, though? He was just in it for the blood and screaming. Early humanity quickly noticed something odd. The armies that prayed to Ares before battle tended to lose. A lot. He'd get all worked up about the conflict, charge in without a plan, and basically inspire the same reckless approach in his followers. Meanwhile, his sister Athena, technically a wisdom goddess who moonlighted in strategic warfare, had a much better track record. Wait! The Talaxian ambassador's fins fluttered in confusion. Your species had 2 deities of war? Oh, we had dozens, depending on where and when you look, I replied. We're nothing if not thorough when it comes to inventing beings to blame for our violent tendencies. But back to Ares. The ancient Greeks, one of our more philosophically nitpicky civilizations, started to notice this pattern of Ares being absolutely rubbish at helping his followers win. So they began the first performance improvement plan for a deity in human history. They reduced his worship, wrote unflattering stories about him, and gradually demoted him in their pantheon. In one famous story, Ares gets trapped in a bronze jar by two giants for 13 months. In another, he gets stabbed by a mortal and runs away crying to his father Zeus. Not exactly the inspirational press you want for your war god. The Romans later tried to rebrand him as Mars, making him more dignified and strategic. But the damage was done. Humans had started the dangerous precedent of expecting competence from their god of war. "This is unprecedented," Vkr'lak murmured. "In all documented galactic history, no species has ever performance reviewed their deities." "Oh, we were just getting started," I said, accepting a new drink from a hovering server drone, this time making sure it was human-compatible. "The real trouble began when we invented gunpowder. See, gods like Ares came from a time of bronze swords and formation fighting. They understood the honor and glory of looking your enemy in the eye as you tried to stab them. But humans, being the innovative little problem solvers we are, decided that killing each other from increasingly great distances was much more efficient. Ares hated gunpowder, despised it, called it cowardly and dishonorable. But humans didn't particularly care what the god of war thought about technological progress in warfare. We kept innovating. Rifles, cannons, machine guns, bombers, missiles, drones, each putting more distance between the killer and the killed. With each innovation, Ares grew more irrelevant. He'd appear on battlefields, bellowing about glory and honor, while humans in trenches died by the thousands from artillery they couldn't even see. He'd try to inspire heroic charges, only to watch soldiers get mowed down by machine gun fire. He began to seem less like a fearsome god of war, and more like an out-of-touch middle manager who didn't understand how the business had changed. "A fascinating theological development," noted the Mu'al ambassador, their gaseous forms shifting in contemplative patterns. "Did your god of war not attempt to adapt?" "That's exactly the problem," I replied. "He didn't, and humans have very little patience for entities that won't evolve with us." The real breaking point came during what we call World War I, the first truly industrialized global conflict, where humanity demonstrated just how efficiently we could slaughter ourselves with modern technology. Ares was horrified, not by the death toll, mind you, but by the lack of what he considered proper combat. Soldiers living in muddy trenches for years, dying from disease as often as enemy fire, being gassed, bombed, and shot without ever seeing their killers. In his frustration, Ares tried to inspire a return to honorable combat. He appeared in dreams and visions to generals, encouraging massive frontal assaults against entrenched machine gun positions. The results were predictably catastrophic. "Your deity actively gave bad tactical advice?" The Vkr'lak ambassador's antennae twitched in what I recognized as alarm. "Yep." And humans, being the judgmental creatures we are, started to seriously question the competence of our war god. Some even suggested he was actively working against us. This is where the story gets interesting. During a particularly disastrous battle on the Western Front, a young lieutenant named James Harrison found himself the sole survivor of his company, after they followed orders based on what his commanding officer claimed was divine inspiration from the spirit of war itself. As Harrison lay wounded in the mud, surrounded by his dead comrades, legend has it that Ares appeared to him, lamenting the dishonorable nature of modern combat. Harrison, delirious from pain and filled with rage at the senseless loss of his friends, did something unprecedented in human theological history. He court-martialed a god. "You're relieved of duty," Harrison reportedly told the god of war, "for gross incompetence and dereliction of duty to those who fight in your name." Ares apparently laughed. "Gods don't get fired by mortals, after all." But Harrison wasn't finished. "You don't understand," the lieutenant said. "This isn't a request. Humanity has evolved beyond you. We've become better at war than our god of war. You're obsolete." And something strange happened then. As the story goes, Ares began to fade. Just slightly at first, like a radio losing signal. The god was confused, then alarmed, as he realized what was happening. Humans were collectively losing faith not just in him, but in the very concept he represented. "You can't kill a god," Ares allegedly protested. Harrison's response became famous in human military legend. "Watch us." "This is deeply disturbing," the Talaxian ambassador's translation unit conveyed, though their body language suggested fascination rather than actual distress. "You imply that human collective belief, or disbelief, has tangible effects on cosmic entities?" "That's our working theory," I shrugged. though our theologians and quantum physicists have been arguing about the mechanics for centuries. Here's where the story becomes more historical than mythological. After World War I came World War II, even more mechanized, more distant, more industrial in its approach to death. Strategic bombing, nuclear weapons, tanks, aircraft carriers. The face of war had changed forever, and there was no going back to the battlefield that Ares understood. But surprisingly, Ares didn't fade away entirely. He adapted finally, but too late and in the wrong direction. He became a patron not of honorable combat, but of blind rage and atrocity. The god who had once stood for the warrior's code now attached himself to the darkest aspects of human conflict. Humanity collectively said no thanks to this new version of Ares. Veterans particularly rejected him, establishing codes of conduct even within the horror of modern warfare. The Geneva Conventions, rules of engagement, the concept of war crimes, all human attempts to impose order and limits on something that our former god now represented as limitless chaos. The final blow came in an unexpected way. As human warfare became increasingly technological, professional, and, ironically, more rule-governed, we developed something Ares never expected, a distaste for war itself. Wait! Vkr'lak's appendages froze in confusion. Your species, famous throughout the galaxy for its military prowess, developed an aversion to war? Not an aversion to fighting, I clarified. An aversion to unnecessary conflict. Humans will absolutely throw down when needed. We're still very good at that part. But we started seeing war as a failure of diplomacy rather than a glorious end in itself. This was anathema to Ares. A god of war cannot exist in a culture that sees war as a necessary evil rather than a sacred duty or glorious opportunity. As humanity's relationship with organized violence evolved, Ares found himself with fewer and fewer true believers. By the late 21st century, when humans achieved faster-than-light travel and joined the galactic community, Ares was already more of a historical footnote than an active deity. The final nail in his divine coffin was our first contact with aggressive alien species. Ah. The Vkr'lak ambassador's mandibles clicked knowingly. The Korthos incursion, I nodded. Nothing unites humans like an outside threat. When the Korthos attacked our colony on Proxima Centauri b, humanity responded not with berserker rage, but with cold calculating efficiency. Our response was measured, proportional, and devastatingly effective. The assembled ambassadors shifted uncomfortably. The human counteroffensive against the Korthos was still studied in military academies across the galaxy, nearly a century later. We didn't fight like Ares would have wanted. With passion and chaos, I continued. We fought like Athena, with strategy, technology, and precision. And we didn't just win. We did so while minimizing civilian casualties on both sides. Ares, according to human mystics and sensitives, made one final appearance during the Korthos conflict. He allegedly manifested on the bridge of the UES Thermopylae during the decisive Battle of Proxima Prime, attempting to inspire Captain Apholayan to launch a full retaliatory strike against Korthos civilian centers. Apholayan, famously, had the ship's AI register a formal rejection of tactical advice from an unauthorized entity, and proceeded with the planned surgical strikes against military targets only. That, as far as anyone can tell, was the last documented appearance of humanity's god of war. So you bureaucratically executed your deity. The Mu'al ambassador's gaseous form swirled in what my neural translator suggested was a mixture of amusement and disbelief. I prefer to think of it as early retirement, I replied, though I suppose killed through collective irrelevance is more accurate. The small gathering of ambassadors had grown during my storytelling. At least a dozen representatives from various species now crowded our alcove, their attention fixed on me with expressions ranging from fascination to horror, to what I could only interpret as existential dread. But surely, ventured a new voice, belonging to the amphibious Kolari ambassador, this creates a dangerous theological vacuum? All species require a patron deity of combat to channel their aggressive impulses. I couldn't help but laugh at that. That's the thing about humans. We don't think we need cosmic micromanagement for our violent tendencies. We're perfectly capable of regulating them ourselves. Then who oversees your warfare? Pressed Vkr'lak. Who blesses your weapons and sanctions your conflicts? We do, I said simply. Through international laws, military codes of conduct, civilian oversight of armed forces, and transparent justification of military action. We decided that if we're going to fight, we'd better be able to explain why, without pointing to a god and saying, "He made me do it." The Vkr'lak ambassador's antennae flattened against their carapace. This is why your species is simultaneously so respected and feared in galactic military circles. You take full responsibility for your violence. Exactly, I nodded. And that's also why we're so careful with it. When you can't blame a deity for your wars, you have to be damn sure they're necessary. The Talaxian made a burbling sound that my translator couldn't quite interpret. After a moment, it managed. But what about the human battle frenzy? The berserker state that your soldiers are known to enter? Surely that is the influence of your war god. I shook my head. Nope. That's all us, I'm afraid. Earns out humans don't need divine inspiration to be terrifying in combat. We're plenty capable of that on our own. A thoughtful silence fell over the gathering. I could almost see them processing the implications. A species that had not only questioned its deities, but had actively retired them when they failed to meet expectations. A species that took full ownership of both its capacity for violence and its responsibility to control it. Captain Vega, Vkr'lak finally said, their voice carrying that peculiar tone that the translator rendered as philosophical uncertainty. Do you not fear divine retribution for this theological coup? I considered this for a moment. Ambassador, humanity has launched itself to the stars, cured diseases that plagued us for millennia, created artificial intelligence, and joined a galactic community of incredible diversity, all while our old gods have faded into mythology. If there was going to be divine retribution, I think we would have seen it by now. The Mhul ambassador's cloud form pulsed with what I recognized as their version of laughter. Perhaps your gods fear you as much as some of us do. That drew nervous tittering from the assembled diplomats. I wouldn't go that far, I smiled, but we did teach them an important lesson. Even gods need to evolve. As the diplomatic reception began to wind down, Ambassador Vkr'lak pulled me aside, their appendages moving in the pattern that indicated a desire for private conversation. Captain, there is something I must ask, away from the others. Of course, Ambassador. This tale of deposing your war deity, it troubles me deeply. Not because I find it offensive, but because I find it inspiring. Their voice dropped to what was clearly meant to be a whisper, though the translator maintained the same volume. The Kree have served Vkr'lak for 9,000 cycles. Our wars are fought in his name. Our warriors die with his battle cry on their lips. But he is not a kind god, and our wars are rarely necessary. I carefully kept my expression neutral. Ambassador, I'm not in the business of encouraging theological revolutions in allied species. Of course not, they hurried to clarify. I merely wonder, how did it begin, this questioning? I thought about it for a moment. It wasn't a single moment, really. It was countless small ones. Warriors who returned from battle wondering why their prayers went unanswered. Generals who succeeded by ignoring divine wisdom. Civilians who questioned why a god of war would demand conflict when peace was clearly beneficial. No single human killed our god of war, Ambassador. We all did, gradually, by expecting better. Vkr'lak's appendages twisted in what I recognized as their version of deep thought. I've said too much, I added quickly. The relationship between a species and its deities is unique and personal. What worked, or in this case what happened, for humans might be completely inappropriate for the Kree. Yes, of course, they replied, though their tone suggested ongoing contemplation. Still, it is fascinating to consider that deities might be subject to performance reviews. I couldn't help but smile at that. Just between us, Ambassador, humans didn't stop with our war god. We've been quietly retiring underperforming deities for millennia. These days, most of them serve more as cultural symbols than active cosmic forces. All of them? Vkr'lak seemed genuinely shocked. Well, no, I admitted. Some adapted. Some found new portfolios. Our goddess of wisdom is doing quite well in the information age, for instance. And oddly enough, some of our minor deities of hearth and home have seen a resurgence as we've expanded to the stars. Turns out, when you're living in a habitat dome on a hostile planet, household protections become very appealing again. The ambassador's appendages relaxed slightly, so it is not a complete divine extinction event. More of a cosmic reorganization, I suggested. The gods that help us thrive tend to thrive themselves. The ones that hold us back don't. Vkr'lak was silent for a long moment. Thank you, Captain Vega. This has been most enlightening. I believe I understand humans a little better now. Happy to provide some insight, Ambassador. Though I should note that if you ask 10 different humans about our theological history, you'll get 11 different answers. That earned me what the translator interpreted as a laugh. Even in matters of cosmic significance, you remain contradictory. It's part of our charm, I replied with a wink. 3 standard months after the diplomatic reception, I received a secure transmission from Ambassador Vkr'lak. Such direct communications were unusual. Most diplomatic correspondence went through proper channels, but not unprecedented. Captain Vega, the ambassador began without preamble, their image flickering slightly over the quantum entanglement link. I thought you should know that the Kree Theological Council has initiated what they are calling a divine performance assessment of Vkr'lak. I carefully kept my expression neutral, though internally I was shocked. The Kree were one of the most traditionally religious species in the Conclave. That's quite a development, Ambassador. May I ask what prompted this? Vkr'lak's appendages moved in what I recognized as their equivalent of a shrug. Statistical analysis primarily. Someone in our war ministry compiled data showing that conflicts initiated under the divine inspiration of Vkr'lak have a 78% higher casualty rate and a 23% lower success rate than those planned according to standard tactical protocols. I see, I replied carefully. And the Theological Council was receptive to this analysis? Surprisingly so. It seems many had harbored similar doubts but lacked the cultural framework to express them. Vkr'lak paused. Your story about human theological evolution provided that framework. I winced slightly. Ambassador, I want to be clear that I wasn't trying to instigate a religious reformation in Kree society. Of course not, they assured me. You merely shared a historical account. How we Kree interpret and apply that history is entirely our responsibility. They paused again. Though I must thank you for sharing it. It has been liberating. To consider that devotion need not mean blind obedience, even to a deity. What happens now? I asked, genuinely curious. The assessment will take several cycles to complete. Vkr'lak will be evaluated on multiple criteria. Battlefield success rates, unnecessary casualty prevention, diplomatic conflict resolution support, and warrior mental health outcomes. I couldn't help but smile at the bureaucratic approach. And if Vkr'lak fails this assessment? Vkr'lak's appendages twisted in what I recognized as discomfort. We are not as direct as humans. There will be no divine execution, but there has been discussion of reassigning his portfolio. Perhaps war is not his ideal domain. The Council is considering whether he might be better suited as a deity of historical commemoration, or perhaps martial arts competitions. A cosmic career change, I suggested. Precisely, Vkr'lak agreed. We are not abandoning our faith, merely ensuring that our cosmic patrons serve the best interests of our species. That sounds remarkably sensible, Ambassador. We thought so. Their appendages shifted in what I recognized as their version of pride. The most fascinating development, however, is Vkr'lak's response. Oh? Now I was genuinely intrigued. He appears to be adapting. Already his manifestations have shifted from demanding blood sacrifice and conquest to emphasizing strategic restraint and justified defense. It is as though the mere initiation of performance review has inspired improved performance. I laughed at that. You know, that's not so different from human workplace dynamics. Indeed. It seems that even cosmic entities respond to accountability measures. Vkr'lak's appendages moved in what my cultural training identified as their equivalent of a smile. I wish to inform you of these developments personally, Captain, and to thank you. I didn't do anything, Ambassador. This was entirely your people's initiative. Perhaps. But you showed us that questioning our gods need not be sacrilege. It can be a form of respect. Expecting better of them honors what they truly should be. After we concluded our conversation, I sat at my desk for a long time, thinking about the implications. Humanity's theological evolution had always seemed unique to us, a product of our particularly questioning nature and our complicated relationship with authority. But perhaps it wasn't so unique after all. Perhaps all sentient species eventually reach a point where they question the cosmic forces that supposedly guide them. Perhaps divine performance reviews are an inevitable stage of theological development. I smiled to myself, imagining a future conclave reception where representatives from a dozen species compared notes on how they'd reformed, retired, or reassigned their underperforming deities. Cosmic HR departments evaluating divine performance metrics. Gods anxiously awaiting their quarterly reviews. We hadn't just killed our god of war. We'd started a galactic management revolution. And somewhere in the vast cosmic expanse, I couldn't help but think that Ares, or whatever remained of him, was watching with grudging respect. It's disrupting the established order of things, even when that order is divine. You know, I said to my AI assistant as I filed my report on the conversation with Vkr'lak. There's a certain irony in all this. What's that, Captain? The AI's voice was pleasantly neutral. Ares was furious that we developed weapons that made killing more distant, more technological, and less personal. He thought it made us soft. Based on historical accounts, that seems accurate, the AI agreed. But the truth is, those same developments are what eventually led us to develop stronger ethical frameworks around warfare. The more efficiently we could kill, the more carefully we felt we needed to consider when killing was necessary. A counterintuitive development, the AI noted. Exactly. Ares wanted us to remain passionate, blood-soaked warriors who glorified combat. But that approach leads to unnecessary wars and excessive casualties. By becoming more soft in his eyes, more technological, more distant, more rule-governed in our approach to conflict, we actually became far more effective warriors. And more ethical ones, the AI added. Yes, I agreed. We killed our god of war not because we became peaceful, but because we became better at war than he was. We outgrew him. The AI was silent for a moment, processing. Captain, do you believe other species will follow a similar path? I thought about Ambassador Vkr'lak and the divine performance review they were conducting. I think it's already happening, I said. And I think it's a good thing. The galaxy will be better off with fewer gods of war and more species taking responsibility for their own conflicts. Even though humans are known throughout the Conclave for their military capabilities? Especially because of that, I replied. The best fighters aren't those who love fighting. They're those who understand its cost and choose to fight anyway when necessary. That's what Ares never understood, and why he eventually became obsolete. I finished my report and sent it to Fleet Command, knowing they'd find the theological developments among the Kree interesting, if not immediately significant to human interests. As I prepared for my next shift, I found myself wondering about the other gods and cosmic forces that guided the various species of the Conclave. How many of them were overdue for a performance review? How many had adapted to changing circumstances, and how many were clinging to outdated portfolios? One thing seemed increasingly clear. Divine unemployment might become a significant cosmic issue in the coming centuries. Perhaps the Conclave should establish a deity retraining program. I laughed at the thought and made a mental note to suggest it to Ambassador Vkr'lak at the next reception. Something told me they'd appreciate the joke, and maybe, just maybe, take it seriously. After all, in a universe where gods can be retired for poor performance, anything is possible. The end. You want me to do what to an alien vessel? Lieutenant Commander Amelia Reed stared at her captain with the kind of expression typically reserved for people suggesting skinny dipping in reactor coolant. Captain Marcus Blackwood's weathered face remained impassive, the only hint of his amusement being the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. I believe I was quite clear, L.C. Reed. I want you to broadcast Baby Shark across all frequencies at their ship. The bridge of the UES Intrepid fell into the kind of silence usually found in vacuum, appropriate, considering they were currently drifting in it. Reed blinked twice, her brain attempting to process the order without short-circuiting. Sir, with all due respect, that's a war crime on at least 12 planets. 13, actually, piped up Communications Officer Takashi from his station. The Regellians recently classified it under cruel and unusual punishment after that incident with the ambassador's offspring. Blackwood sighed, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. Look, they've been scanning us for the past hour, probing every system we have. Standard protocols aren't working. It's time to show these, whatever they are, that humans don't appreciate being digitally felt up without buying us dinner first. And that, dear readers, is how humanity's first contact with the Vexari Collective began. Not with an exchange of scientific knowledge or diplomatic overtures, but with a 21st century children's song that had been tormenting parents for over 2 centuries. The Vexari, as it turned out, were not amused. Actually, that's not entirely accurate. The Vexari were physically incapable of being amused, being a species of hyperlogical silicon-based lifeforms whose thought processes resembled what you'd get if you crossed a supercomputer with a particularly pedantic philosophy professor. Captain Analyst ZX729, the closest approximation human vocal cords could manage without spraining something, stared at the view screen with what passed for confusion among his kind. A slight tilt of his crystalline head structure and the barest flicker of his internal luminescence. The auditory assault continues, Thought Commander, reported Secondary Analyst BR-486. Our translation systems are struggling to interpret. ZX-729's crystalline appendages twitched in the Vexari equivalent of a frustrated sigh, meaning, the pattern repeats. Baby shark, do-do-do-do-do-do. Then mommy shark, do-do-do-do-do-do. Then daddy shark. I comprehend the pattern, interrupted ZX-729. What I fail to comprehend is the purpose. BR-486's internal lights pulsed uncertainly. Perhaps it is a mating ritual, or a declaration of their evolutionary hierarchy. The references to multiple generations of aquatic predators suggests nothing except that these humans are even more irrational than our preliminary studies indicated, ZX-729 stated flatly. Continue the comprehensive scan. I want every piece of data on their vessel before diplomatic contact is established. As the scan intensified, neither of the Vexari noticed the small alert on their console, indicating that the humans had detected their more invasive scanning protocols, and were now tracking the signal back to its source. This, as they would soon discover, was mistake number 1. Jumped out. They were still scanning us, Reed reported, fingers flying across her tactical station. And they've just switched to a deeper level protocol. They're trying to access our database. Blackwood's eyebrows shot up. Bold move for someone who just got Baby Shark Ed. Sir, should we switch to wheels on the bus? Asked Takashi, with the deadpan delivery of someone who had witnessed far too many of the captain's unconventional tactics. Not yet. Let's see what our friends are after. Blackwood leaned forward in his command chair. Lieutenant Kim, what can you tell me about our visitors? Lieutenant J. Kim, the ship's science officer, pulled up a holographic display of the alien vessel. It's unlike anything in our databases, sir. Silicon-based construction with what appears to be crystalline components. Energy signatures suggest a propulsion system that's, well, frankly, it's elegant. They're using some form of space-time manipulation that makes our warp drives look like steam engines. So they're technologically advanced. Good to know. Blackwood mused. What about weapons? Kim's forehead creased as he studied his readings. That's the interesting part. I'm not detecting anything that resembles conventional weaponry. No energy cannons, no missile systems, nothing. A research vessel, then? Possibly. Or their entire ship is a weapon, Reed finished, a note of professional admiration in her voice. Smart. Very smart. Blackwood drummed his fingers on the armrest. Or they've never needed weapons. Reed, what are they accessing now? Reed's expression shifted from concentration to alarm. Sir, they're attempting to download our historical archives. Specifically, they're targeting our military history. A slow, predatory smile spread across Blackwood's face, the kind that had made countless cadets at the academy reconsider their career choices. Perfect, let them. Sir? Reed looked confused. Lieutenant Kim, remember that special project I had you work on? The one with the modified historical files? Kim's eyes widened in understanding. The Welcome to Earth package, sir? That's the one. Make sure our visitors get the full experience. Kim's fingers flew across his console. Diverting their access now, sir. They'll be getting the enhanced version of human history. And cut the baby shark. I think we're ready to move to Phase 2 of First Contact. Which is? Reed asked, looking both concerned and curious. Blackwood's smile widened, showing them exactly what happens when you scan a human warship without permission. Back on the Vexari vessel, alarms began to sound. Captain Analyst, the data transfer has accelerated exponentially, reported BR-486, his crystalline form vibrating with concern. The humans appear to have opened their databases to us. ZX-729's internal lights flickered in suspicion. Analyze for deception. Initial scans detect no encryption or false data packets. BR-486 paused. They appear to be sharing their military history. Display. The central view screen of the Vexari ship filled with images that, had the aliens possessed biological stomachs, would have made them deeply nauseated. Battles. Warfare on a scale that the peace-loving Vexari had never imagined. Humans fighting humans with increasingly devastating weapons throughout their history. These cannot be accurate, ZX-729 stated, though uncertainty tinged his electronic voice. Cross-reference with our preliminary studies. Processing. Data appears consistent, Captain Analyst. The humans have engaged in continuous warfare throughout their recorded history. They have developed weapons specifically designed to... BR-486 paused, his lights dimming in what might have been horror. to inflict maximum suffering before death. The images continued, mushroom clouds rising over cities, biological weapons, orbital bombardments of their own colonies during what the database labeled the Secession Wars. And their most recent conflicts? ZX729 asked, a new sensation, something akin to dread, spreading through his crystalline neural network. Bureau 486 accessed the data. The Archon incursion of 2187. A species attempted to claim a human colony world. The view screen displayed a solar system. Then in a blink, 3 planets simply vanished. What happened to those planets? ZX729 demanded. According to these records, the humans converted them to their base atomic components and used the resulting energy to power a weapon that collapsed the Archon homeworld into a black hole. If ZX729 had possessed blood, it would have run cold. This vessel we've encountered, this Intrepid, what class of ship is it? BR-486's lights pulsed rapidly as he accessed the data. It is designated as a light diplomatic escort. Diplomatic escort, ZX729 repeated. And their actual warships? Before BR-486 could answer, the view screen changed again, showing massive vessels that dwarfed the Intrepid by orders of magnitude. Planet killers. System enders. Ships designed with the singular purpose of bringing extinction to any who opposed humanity's expansion. Captain Analyst. BR-486's voice had taken on a static-laden quality that among Vexaries signified extreme distress. The humans appear to have created a philosophical framework around warfare. They call it the doctrine of disproportionate response. Explain. If threatened, humans do not respond with equivalent force. Their standard protocol is to escalate beyond all reasonable measures to ensure no future threats emerge. BR-486 paused, as if struggling to comprehend. They destroyed an entire species because that species destroyed one human colony. ZX729 processed this information silently. Then, with deliberate calm, terminate all scanning operations immediately. Prepare to withdraw to a safe distance. Captain Analyst, should we not attempt communication? The collective mandates. The collective has never encountered a species like this, ZX729 interrupted. We will withdraw and report. Let the High Analysts determine our next course of action. As if sensing their decision, the human ship's transmissions changed again. This time it wasn't a childish song but a simple message, repeating on all frequencies. Vexarie vessel, this is Captain Marcus Blackwood of the United Earthship Intrepid. We've noticed your interest in our history. Perhaps you'd like to discuss it. Face to face? Back on the Intrepid, Blackwood was struggling to maintain his serious expression as Reed reported the alien ship's reaction. They're backing away slowly, sir, like someone who's accidentally wandered into the wrong neighborhood and just spotted a gang of particularly unfriendly individuals. Any response to our hail? Reed shook her head. Nothing yet, but they've stopped their scans completely. Takashi, are they communicating with anyone? The communications officer checked his readings. Yes, sir. They're transmitting a massive data package toward a point about 20 light-years from here. Based on the signal strength, I'd say it's a high-priority message. Calling home to report the scary humans, Blackwood mused. Kim, what exactly did you include in that enhanced history package? Lieutenant Kim had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. Well, sir, I may have exaggerated certain aspects of human military history, and possibly invented a few interstellar conflicts that never happened. How exaggerated are we talking? I might have suggested that we ended the Archon species by converting 3 planets into a weapon. Blackwood blinked. The Archon? Those peaceful traders who helped us establish our first extrasolar colonies? In my defense, sir, you did say to make it convincing. Kim cleared his throat. I also may have implied that this ship, which they correctly identified as a diplomatic escort, is actually our equivalent of a rowboat, and that our actual warships are the size of small moons. A beat of silence fell over the bridge before Blackwood burst into laughter. Lieutenant, when we get back to Earth, I'm buying you a drink. Several drinks. Sir, Reed interrupted. They're moving again. Looks like they're positioning for a faster-than-light jump. They're running away? Blackwood looked almost disappointed. After all the effort we put into our welcome package? It appears so, sir. The captain sighed. Well, that's disappointing. I was hoping for at least a conversation before they fled in terror. He straightened in his chair. Takashi, prepare a message. Standard first contact protocols. Emphasis on peaceful intentions. Let's see if we can salvage this before they spread tales of planet-destroying humans across the galaxy. Too late, sir, Takashi reported. They've just gone to FTL. They're gone. Blackwood slumped back in his chair. Well, shit. 3 days later, as the Intrepid continued its survey mission of the sector, Takashi nearly jumped out of his seat. Sir, massive energy signature at bearing 047 Mark Whitey. Reed was instantly alert. Multiple vessels dropping out of FTL, Captain. I count 20 ships. Configuration matches our friends from before, but these are much larger. Red alert, Blackwood ordered, all humor gone from his voice. Battle stations. The bridge transformed as officers moved with practiced efficiency to their combat positions. Protective shields slid over the viewports, and the lighting shifted to the dull red of combat conditions. Are they charging weapons? Blackwood asked. Reed frowned at her console. Still not detecting anything that registers as conventional weaponry, sir. But their energy signatures are fluctuating in a pattern I don't recognize. Sir, Takashi called out. We're receiving a transmission. Text only. Let's hear it. Takashi cleared his throat. To the human vessel Intrepid, we are representatives of the Vkr'lak Collective High Analysis Council. We have reviewed your historical data and wish to establish diplomatic relations. We come in peace and acknowledge your species' right to exist unmolested by ours. Blackwood raised an eyebrow. That's surprisingly straightforward. There's more, sir. We bring cultural and technological offerings as a gesture of our peaceful intentions. We recognize humanity's defensive protocols and have no desire to trigger your doctrine of disproportionate response. A slow smile spread across Blackwood's face. They bought it. They actually bought it. Sir, Kim interjected, looking concerned. I think we may have created a slight misunderstanding. Explain? Based on their approach formation and the way they're positioning their ships, I think they believe we're some kind of hyper-aggressive warrior species that they need to appease. Blackwood considered this for a moment. Well, to be fair, we did spend most of our history fighting each other, and our first response to them scanning us was to blast them with Baby Shark. Which, I maintain, is a war crime, Reed muttered. Noted, LC. Blackwood tapped his fingers thoughtfully on his armrest. Options, people? We could tell them the truth, Kim suggested. Explain that much of what they downloaded was creatively enhanced. And miss this opportunity? Blackwood shook his head. The Admiralty has been trying to establish contact with new species for years. Now we have one practically begging to be our friends because they think we'll atomize their planets if they look at us funny. Sir, Reed's voice held a note of caution. Lying to a potential ally about our military capabilities seems ethically questionable. I prefer to think of it as strategic ambiguity, LC Reed. Blackwood straightened his uniform. Besides, we're not going to threaten them. We're just going to omit certain clarifications for now. And when they discover we can't actually turn planets into black holes? Kim asked. Blackwood's grin was positively wolfish. By then, hopefully, they'll like us too much to care. The Vkr'lak, as it turned out, were not just technologically advanced, they were technological artists. Their delegation, led by High Analyst PR-001, a being of such importance that his crystalline structure contained trace elements of materials not found on the standard periodic table, presented gifts that left even the jaded crew of the Intrepid speechless. This device, PR-001 explained, his translated voice oddly melodic through the universal translator, converts atmospheric carbon dioxide directly into breathable oxygen with 99.8% efficiency. We thought it might be useful for your colony worlds. Which was a polite way of saying they'd noticed humanity's tendency to terraform planets by brute force rather than finesse. And this, PR-001 continued, presenting a small crystalline cube that hummed with internal energy, is a prototype of our quantum computation matrix. It can process approximately 1,000 times the data of your most advanced systems. Blackwood accepted the gifts with appropriately solemn gratitude, all while maintaining what Reed had privately dubbed his, "Don't worry, we probably won't destroy your civilization today" expression. The meeting was proceeding in the Intrepid's conference room, which the crew had hastily decorated with various impressive-looking but ultimately meaningless military insignia and charts. Lieutenant Kim had even programmed the room's displays to occasionally flash what appeared to be targeting calculations, complete with ominous red countdown timers that reset just before reaching 0. "Hi, Analyst," Blackwood said after the initial exchange of gifts. "While we appreciate these technological offerings, I must confess some curiosity. What prompted the collective to send such a substantial delegation?" PR-001's crystalline structure shimmered in what the humans would later learn was the Vexari equivalent of nervous laughter. "Captain Blackwood, the Vexari Collective has existed for over 12,000 of your years. In that time, we have encountered 47 distinct spacefaring civilizations." "Impressive," Blackwood nodded. "None of them," PR-001 continued, "have developed what you call the Nova Cannon, or the Planetary Conversion Protocol." Lieutenant Kim suddenly developed an intense fascination with his datapad, carefully avoiding Blackwood's gaze. "Ah, those," Blackwood said smoothly. "Standard defensive measures, I assure you." "Indeed." PR-001's lights pulsed rapidly. "The collective has always pursued peaceful cooperation with other species. We believe that sharing of knowledge and resources benefits all." "A commendable philosophy," Blackwood agreed. "One that humanity shares." This statement caused a noticeable ripple of light patterns among the Vexari delegation, their equivalent of raised eyebrows. "Forgive me, Captain," PR-001 said cautiously, "but our analysis of your historical archives suggests that humanity has different priorities when it comes to interspecies relations." "Oh?" "The complete eradication of the Archon species after they claimed a single colony world seems to indicate a preference for overwhelming dominance rather than cooperation." Blackwood leaned forward slightly. "High Analyst, humanity has indeed had a complex evolutionary path. Our history is filled with conflict, yes, but also with growth and learning from our mistakes. Such as the mistake of only destroying half of the Krellian Empire during the border disputes of 2195? One of the junior Vexari analysts asked, before being silenced by a sharp light pattern from PR-001. Blackwood managed to keep his face neutral, though he made a mental note to have a very long conversation with Lieutenant Kim about the specifics of his enhanced history package. "What I'm trying to express," Blackwood continued smoothly, "is that humanity is interested in peaceful relations with the Vexari Collective. We have no desire for conflict." "This is reassuring," PR-001 said, though his light patterns suggested lingering doubt. "The Collective is prepared to establish formal diplomatic ties with humanity. We believe there is much we can learn from each other. Like how to make up convincing military histories to scare the hell out of peaceful species," Blackwood thought but didn't say. Instead, he smiled warmly. "I couldn't agree more, High Analyst. I believe this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship." As diplomatic meetings went, it was remarkably productive. By the end of the first day, humanity and the Vexari had established preliminary trade agreements, scientific exchange protocols, and mutual defense pacts, the latter being somewhat redundant given the Vexari's apparent belief that humanity could unmake solar systems if sufficiently annoyed. The true challenge came when PR-001 requested a tour of the Intrepid. "Is that advisable, sir?" Reed asked quietly as they prepared for the tour. "What if they realize we don't actually have planet-killing capabilities?" Blackwood shrugged. "The Intrepid is a state-of-the-art vessel with plenty of impressive tech. We just need to be creative with our explanations." Which is how Lieutenant Commander Reed found herself standing beside a standard waste reclamation unit, gesturing to it with grave seriousness as she explained to the Vexari delegation. "And this is one component of our matter conversion system. In peacetime, it recycles biological waste into useful materials. In combat situations, well, let's just say it has more aggressive applications." The Vexari lights pulsed with what might have been alarm. When they reached the ship's modest armory, Lieutenant Kim took over, pointing to a standard phase rifle. "This personal defense weapon can be calibrated from mild discomfort to atomic disruption. Most of our security personnel prefer not to use the higher settings. Too messy." By the time they reached engineering, Chief Engineer Okonkwo had caught on to the game. She patted the warp core housing with affectionate pride. "This beauty gets us from point A to point B, but with some minor adjustments, it can also send point B into another dimension entirely. We only tested that function once. The planet was uninhabited, fortunately." The Vexari delegation grew noticeably more subdued with each stop on the tour. Finally, they reached the bridge, where Blackwood took center stage. "And this," he said, gesturing grandly to the tactical station, "is where Lieutenant Commander Reed works her magic. One touch and, Well, I'm sure you've read about the consequences in our historical archives. PR-001's crystalline structure had taken on a distinctly pale hue. Captain Blackwood, I must ask, do all human vessels possess these capabilities? Blackwood exchanged a quick glance with Reed before answering. The Intrepid is, as I mentioned, merely a diplomatic escort. Our actual warships are considerably more robust. I see. PR-001's lights pulsed in what the humans were beginning to recognize as deep contemplation. And how many of these warships does humanity possess? That information is classified, I'm afraid, Blackwood replied smoothly. But rest assured, we maintain only what is necessary for the defense of our territories. Of course. PR-001 seemed to hesitate before continuing. Captain, the Collective has been exploring this sector for some time. We have encountered several species that might benefit from diplomatic relations with humanity. Is that so? Yes. The Mekvar, for instance, have expansionist tendencies that have caused concern among their neighbors, and the Drexian hegemony has recently claimed 3 systems that were previously neutral territory. Blackwood raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting we should intervene in these situations? Not at all, PR-001 said quickly. Merely that the knowledge of humanity's peacekeeping capabilities might encourage more diplomatic solutions. And there it was, the real reason for the Vexari's sudden interest in alliance. They wanted humanity as the boogeyman, the threat to hold over other species to keep them in line. Blackwood should have been offended. Instead, he found himself intrigued by the possibilities. Hi, Analyst. I believe we should discuss this further in a more private setting. Perhaps over dinner? I understand your species doesn't consume organic matter, but we could arrange for suitable energy matrices for you and your delegation. PR-001's lights brightened considerably. That would be most acceptable, Captain. There is much the Collective believes we could accomplish together. I bet there is, Blackwood thought. 6 months later, Captain Marcus Blackwood stood before the Admiralty Board in the gleaming headquarters of the United Earth Fleet on Earth. Behind him, a holographic display showed the current status of the new joint Vexari-human diplomatic missions across 3 sectors of space. Let me understand this correctly, Captain, Admiral Hassan said, leaning forward with an expression of cautious amazement. Without firing a single shot, you've established humanity as the de facto peacekeeping force for an area encompassing over 40 intelligent species across 73 star systems? Yes, Admiral, Blackwood replied. Though I should clarify that the actual peacekeeping is done primarily by Vexari diplomatic vessels. Humanity provides the persuasive element. The threat, you mean? Admiral Khatri said bluntly. I prefer to think of it as strategic deterrence through reputation management, Blackwood offered with a slight smile. Admiral Hassan shook her head in disbelief. And the Vexari continue to provide us with their technology, including their FTL advancements and quantum computation systems? Yes, Admiral. They consider it a fair exchange for our protective umbrella. Their latest offering is a gravitational manipulation system that makes our current artificial gravity technology look like a child's science project. All because Lieutenant Kim decided to get creative with our historical archives. Admiral Khatri mused, a note of reluctant admiration in her voice. Lieutenant Commander Kim now, ma'am, Blackwood corrected. I felt a promotion was in order. Admiral Hassan studied the holographic display, where green indicators showed peaceful negotiations in progress throughout the sectors. And what happens when the Vexari discover that we can't actually convert planets into black holes or whatever other nonsense was in that data package? Blackwood's expression turned thoughtful. That's the interesting part, Admiral. I don't think they want to know. The High Analysis Council has been remarkably uninterested in seeing demonstrations of our supposed capabilities. I believe they've chosen to accept the myth because it's useful to them. And to us, Admiral Khatri pointed out. Indeed, Blackwood gestured to the display. Trade has increased 300% across human colonies. Scientific exchange with the Vexari has advanced our technology by what our engineers estimate to be nearly 50 years in some fields, and not a single human casualty. Admiral Hassan nodded slowly. The power of reputation, of story. Exactly, Admiral. Humanity has always excelled at creating stories, myths that shape behavior and expectations. Blackwood allowed himself a small smile. The Vexari and the other species in the sector now have a story about humans, that we're dangerous when provoked but reasonable when respected. A useful story, Admiral Khatri acknowledged, and not entirely untrue. Blackwood added. We may not be able to turn planets into weapons, but Earth history has shown repeatedly what happens when humans are backed into a corner. The admirals exchanged glances. Very well, Captain. Excuse me, Admiral Blackwood, Admiral Hassan said, activating a control on her console that updated Blackwood's rank insignia on his personnel file. The Admiralty approves your recommendation for expanding the joint Vexari Human Peacekeeping Initiative. We'll be assigning 3 more ships to your task force immediately. Thank you, Admiral. Blackwood, now Admiral Blackwood, said with a nod. One last question, Admiral Khatri said as Blackwood prepared to leave. What happened to the baby shark tactic? Is that now standard first contact protocol? Blackwood's expression turned pained. Actually, Admiral, the Vexari have requested we retire that particular approach. Apparently, after analyzing it further, they determined it was, and I quote, unnecessarily cruel even by human standards of warfare. Fair enough, Admiral Hassan chuckled. Dismissed, Admiral Blackwood, and congratulations on creating the most unusual peace in human history, a peace built on a misunderstanding and maintained by a myth. Sometimes, Admiral, Blackwood replied as he turned to leave. Those are the most enduring kinds. 3 years later, the UES Intrepid had been upgraded, refitted, and assigned as the flagship of the Joint Peacekeeping Fleet. Its bridge was now home to both human and Vexari officers, working side by side to maintain the delicate balance of power in their corner of the galaxy. Lieutenant Commander Reed, now Captain Reed with her own command waiting for her after this final mission with her former captain, stood beside Admiral Blackwood as they observed a view screen showing the latest diplomatic conference. Representatives from 26 species sat around a massive table, negotiating territorial rights, trade agreements, and resource-sharing protocols. It's quite something, isn't it? Blackwood mused. 3 years ago, half of those species were at each other's throats. And now they play nice because they think we'll turn their suns inside out if they don't. Reed replied, her tone dry but not disapproving. Peace through superior firepower, even if that firepower is largely theoretical. Reed's lips quirked in a half-smile. Sir, have you ever wondered what would happen if we actually needed to back up our reputation? If some species called our bluff? Blackwood considered this for a moment. I have, but then I remember something my grandmother used to say. The best fight is the one you never have to have. Wise woman. She was. Blackwood turned away from the view screen. Besides, thanks to the Vexari technology we've been integrating into our fleet, we're considerably closer to actually having the capabilities they think we have. Truth is catching up to the myth. That's somewhat terrifying, sir. Only if you're planning to threaten a human colony, Blackwood replied with a wink. Their conversation was interrupted by a communication from the bridge. Admiral, we're receiving a priority message from Vexari High Command. They've detected an unknown vessel entering the sector. Configuration doesn't match any known species. Blackwood and Reed exchanged glances. First contact with a new species? Appears so, sir. Set course to intercept. Standard protocol. Blackwood paused, then added with a mischievous glint in his eye. And have Lieutenant Takashi prepare the cultural exchange package. The cultural exchange package, sir? The confusion in the officer's voice was evident. Yes, file designation welcome to the neighborhood. As the communication ended, Reed raised an eyebrow. Sir, please tell me that's not Baby Shark? No. Blackwood waved dismissively. We've evolved since then. That's a relief. It's the chicken dance now. Reed closed her eyes and pinched the bridge of her nose. Humanity, fuck yeah, she muttered under her breath. Blackwood just grinned. Exactly, Captain. Exactly. As the UES Intrepid adjusted course to meet the unknown vessel, the Vexari officer at the science station, Junior Analyst TX-395, turned to his human counterpart. Lieutenant Kim, I have been meaning to ask. In the historical archives we initially accessed from your ship, is it true that humans once used a device called a Nokia 3310 as an armor-piercing projectile? Lieutenant Kim kept his expression perfectly neutral as he replied. Some things, Junior Analyst, are too classified even for our allies to know. TX-395's lights pulsed in what had become recognizable as the Vexari equivalent of a resigned sigh. I understand. Perhaps it is better not to know all of humanity's secrets. Probably for the best, Kim agreed solemnly. Probably for the best. And as the Intrepid prepared to introduce yet another species to the myth and reality of humanity, Admiral Blackwood couldn't help but reflect on the irony that the most effective weapon humans had ever deployed wasn't a Nova cannon or a planet killer. It was simply humanity's reputation, carefully cultivated and strategically deployed. Sometimes the stories we tell about ourselves are more powerful than any technology we could develop. And sometimes, just sometimes, living up to your own legend is the best path to peace. The end.